The smell of disinfectant filled the air, sharp and cold, as if every breath carried the weight of endings. The hospital corridor was a river of hurried footsteps and murmured instructions, but inside my father's room, time moved slower. Machines hummed their steady rhythm, monitoring each fragile heartbeat, each labored breath. He lay on the bed, pale and thinner than I remembered, his once strong hands now trembling under the weight of weakness. I adjusted the blanket over him, trying to offer warmth that the sterile room could never provide. That was when my sister leaned closer. Her face carried a mask of exhaustion, but her words betrayed something colder. With a sigh, she muttered, just loud enough for him to hear, "He's just a burden now." The words sliced through the silence, sharper than any scalpel. My father's eyelids fluttered, a shadow crossing his face. He heard it, of course he did. The man who had given everything to us was now reduced, in her eyes, to a problem, a weight, a thing to be carried, rather than a life to be cherished. When she whispered those words, something broke inside me, and before I go on, if you've ever seen someone you love being treated unfairly, stay with me until the end. This story might sound like mine, but I promise it will touch yours too. I froze. The machines continued their relentless beeping, but to me, the room felt empty, stripped of air. I looked at my father's eyes, watery yet strong, closing slowly as if trying to hide from the insult. His chest rose and fell with effort, but the pain was no longer only physical, it was emotional, carved deep into the lines of his face. For a moment, I wanted to shout, to unleash the rage boiling inside me, but instead I held it back. Rage could destroy, truth could heal. I turned to my sister. She avoided my gaze, her arms crossed, her lips pressed tight, as though she had spoken an inevitable fact. She believed her words were reality, that a sick, aging father was nothing more than dead weight. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady, carrying more force than any scream. "Do you even know what he gave up for you?" She blinked, startled, and her eyes flickered, uncertain. I pressed on. "When you wanted to study abroad, who sold his land to pay your tuition? Who worked double shifts, coming home with bleeding hands so you could wear a graduation gown?" Her lips parted, but no words came. If you've ever felt that sting of injustice, you know how hard it is to stay silent. And listen, the only way stories like this reach more people who need them is when you share and subscribe. It doesn't just help the channel, it helps keep these voices alive. The doctor, who had been silent in the corner, set down his clipboard and stepped closer. His eyes were kind, but his tone cut straight to the truth. "Your father is not a burden," he said firmly. "Patients like him are the reason families exist, to remind us of sacrifice, of devotion, of love that expects nothing in return." My sister flinched, as though the words struck her harder than mine had. She shifted in her chair, the arrogance drained from her face, replaced with something she had not felt in years: shame. I reached for my father's hand. It felt fragile, paper-thin skin stretched over bones that once lifted me onto his shoulders, once carried groceries after long shifts, once built the very foundation of the house we grew up in. "You are not a burden," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You are the foundation." His lips curved into the faintest smile, tears slipping down his cheeks. The monitor beside him beeped steadily, and in that moment he looked more alive than he had in days. Not because his body was stronger, but because his heart was seen, acknowledged, honored. And by the way, in the pinned comment I left some resources, books and guides that can help us all build stronger families and communities. They're not just products, There are ways to keep this message growing. The room changed. Silence no longer carried judgment but recognition. My mother wiped her eyes quietly in the corner. My sister shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet my father's gaze. She whispered almost to herself, "I didn't know. I forgot." But forgetting was never the excuse. It was easier to dismiss his worth than to remember his sacrifices. Easier to call him a burden than to confront the truth of her own ingratitude. Memories began flooding back into my mind. Nights when he came home soaked from working under the rain. Mornings when he skipped meals so we could eat. I remember being a child, carried on his shoulders through crowded fairs, hearing his laughter fill the air. I remember the times he stood silently in the back row during my achievements, never seeking recognition, only smiling with pride. Every sacrifice had been invisible, and maybe that was the problem. People forget what they do not see. I couldn't let that be his legacy. So I spoke louder, not just to my sister, but to everyone in the room. This man is not a weight to be carried. He carried us his whole life. And if any of you call him a burden again, you will answer to me. My words shook, but they held fire. The nurse by the door lowered her eyes in respect. Even the doctor gave a small nod, as if to say that truth had finally been spoken aloud. But what no one knew, not my mother, not my sister, not even the doctor, was that I had discovered something only days before. While cleaning out my father's desk, I had found an envelope, yellowed with time, hidden beneath a stack of old tax receipts. Inside was a letter in his handwriting, and what he revealed in that letter was something he had never told anyone, something that would not only change the way we saw him, but the way we saw ourselves forever. And when I tell you what was written inside, you'll never look at the word burden the same way again. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the continuation.